Hey guys, it's Dr. Greens. I wanted to go ahead and just do a quick recording of the lecture for midterm today. I'll get this posted. And the lymphatic system and digestion are going to be the content for quiz 4, right? So let's go ahead and let's uh, let's go ahead and get this lecture in. Okay. So guys, the endocrine system. This is going to be just a very basic overview, right? And then we're going to just kind of get into some terms, and then that'll be it. Okay, so obviously, when we talk about the endocrine system, right, we are really talking about multiple endocrine organs. The endocrine system is obviously made up of all the endocrine cells in the body, right? And the endocrine system secretes hormones, right? So those are the chemical messengers that are responsible um, for the activation of obviously different tissues, right? Generally speaking, hormones affect target tissues. Um, that they act upon, right? And so the main purpose of the endocrine system is to help us maintain homeostasis, right? And a lot of the various hormones that are produced are vital in things like obviously regulation of obviously sex characteristics, uh, menstrual cycle, right? Fertility, in both males and females, and obviously also regulation of hunger, glucose, many different things. Hormones are the main chemical messengers that can keep us in homeostasis. So obviously, here's an example, right? So we see with, in the case of obviously someone that potentially maybe they haven't eaten. So this is essentially the relationship between glucose in the liver and the secretion of the secretion of insulin. So generally speaking, normal blood glucose is approximately 60 to 100 milligrams per deciliter at fasting, right? Postprandial after we eat generally is below 140. If you're diabetic, it's at 180 or below, right? So as for an example, if we let's say that I eat obviously a cupcake and we can see that here, right? My blood glucose starts to rise. We have the beta cells in the pancreas that obviously secrete insulin into the bloodstream. That insulin acts obviously like a lock and key to pull the glucose into the cell, right, to be utilized as energy to make ATP, right? So that and the action of insulin lowers my blood glucose back down, right, to that normal range of 60 to 100 milligrams per deciliter. Um, on the flip side, let's say that it's been several hours since I've eaten and my blood glucose falls, right? Obviously, also, right, in my pancreas, I have alpha cells that are going to release glucagon, right, and also in the liver as well. But the liver will break down that the will contains the liver contains glycogen, and glucagon will essentially break down the glycogen and turn that into glucose, right, for utilization, right, to help us kind of create some ATP, right? So the breakdown of glycogen via glucagon, right, will allow blood glucose to rise, right, and bring us back up into homeostasis, particularly if we're hypoglycemic. So if we take a look at some of the endocrine organs that we actually have, right, um, within obviously the body, right? There is actually an axis that exists, okay, between the endocrine glands, such as the hypothalamus and the pituitary, right? And that's actually one of our primary axes for endocrine secretion. We'll talk about that more in a second. Uh, we have various other glands as well: the pineal gland, thyroid glands, parathyroid glands, which are important in calcium regulation, the thymus, right, which is important in immunity, and helps in assist in the differentiation of T cells and lymphocytes, right? And then we have our adrenal glands, um, which assist us in obviously secretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, the pancreas as well, ovaries, testicles, um, and then we have obviously secretion of atrionatritic peptide as well. And then we can see obviously also within the heart. Okay, we also have the secretion of hormones there as well. So endocrine actually there's two kind of separate kind of definitions that we utilize, right? We have endocrine secretion, which essentially is the action on a target tissue that is nearby the gland that's secreting the hormone, and then we have paracrine secretion, okay, and that is actually action on a gland that is farther away. So that's actually more of a target tissue. So that's endocrine versus paracrine, okay. So what are some of the hormones that these glands essentially secrete? Okay, we have the hypothalamus, and so the hypothalamus obviously secretes hypothalamic inhibitory or hypothalamic releasing hormone. Okay, from the anterior pituitary. Okay, the anterior pituitary actually also secretes FSH, okay, follicle stimulating hormone, important obviously in the menstrual cycle of females, luteinizing hormone. Okay, TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, and then ACTH or adrenocorticotropic hormone, and then growth hormone and prolactin. Okay, the posterior pituitary obviously secretes oxytocin and ADH. ADH is important, obviously, in regulation of thirst and also kidney function, regulation of urinary output. Okay, the pineal gland secretes melatonin. Melatonin is, as you guys obviously know, something that can be supplemented, obviously, to assist in sleep. Um, and then the thyroid gland, right, secretes thyroxine. Individuals that have abnormal levels of thyroxine and or maybe even lower levels of thyroxine, we used to actually call this hypothyroidism, but now we're actually utilizing a new term to describe abnormal levels of thyroxine, and that is thyrotoxicosis, right? So, new term. Um, Parathyroid glands, okay, as we've already talked about, secrete parathyroid hormone, which is actually very important in regulation of calcium levels and maintenance of bone density. Okay, so from the adrenal gland, we actually have uh, different steroids that are actually secreted. We have our corticoids like aldosterone, glucocorticoids like cortisol, and then our sex hormones, DHEA, and then we have epinephrine and norepinephrine as well. So we can see if we take a look, pardon me, if we take a look obviously at the structure of the hypothalamus and its communication with the pituitary glands, we can see that this is actually a primary center, pardon me, a primary center of control uh, for the endocrine system. So the vast majority of the secretions from the anterior pituitary, particularly secretions from the ovaries, testes, and thyroid, or I'm sorry, the secretions from the anterior pituitary will actually target, okay, the ovaries, testes, thyroid, adrenal glands, and bones, so on and so forth. These, as we know them, are actually paracrine secretions. In addition, in case secretion of prolactin, and also obviously ADH from the posterior pituitary, um, and obviously adrenal hormones. Those also are paracrine secretions, right? As well. So when we look at um, the kind of the relationship between the anterior and posterior lobe of the pituitary, we know, okay, obviously that, as we just said, the anterior pituitary is going to actually secrete the vast majority um, of our target hormones to target tissues uh, via paracrine secretion. Okay, so the production of ACH, of ADH, and oxytocin, uh, secretion of regulatory hormones, right, like releasing hormone and inhibiting hormone, right, and then we'll also have sympathetic control of our adrenal glands, obviously with our fight or flight response. So the posterior pituitary gland, though, um, as we actually also mentioned, right, helps us kind of regulate the secretion of ADH and oxytocin, but also regulates the secretion of the anterior lobe. As you can see in the picture, there is actually direct communication of neurons from the hypothalamus, right, to the posterior pituitary that are actually going to uh, help us actually promote and or inhibit direct secretion of paracrine secretion from the anterior pituitary. So the posterior pituitary not only releases hormones, but actually has a regulatory effect on the anterior pituitary. So, okay, here's obviously a picture of our thyroid gland. Okay, thyroid gland is obviously located right above the thyroid cartilage in the neck. Um, you can obviously see that um, the thyroid obviously secretes thyroxine, right? And then we have our parathyroid glands that actually exist on top of the thyroid that secrete obviously parathyroid hormone, and obviously help us regulate calcium absorption into bone. All right. So obviously we also have our adrenal glands, okay, which obviously help us in secretion of sex steroids like estrogen, progesterone. Sorry, I got a Google Meet is yelling at me. 1 second, guys. Um, all right. So clearly, okay, we can see that we have three uh, kind of different regions of the adrenal gland, right? We have the outer cortex of the adrenal gland, which is essentially where a lot of our mineral corticoids come from, right? We have the uh, mid portion, right, of the adrenal gland, which is essentially where we have a lot of our glucocorticoids, including cortisol, where they're secreted there. And then obviously we have uh, within the interior portion, right, our sex steroids such as our progesterones, our estrogen, and our androgens like testosterone. And then we can also see obviously that epinephrine and norepinephrine are actually also secreted from the adrenal gland as well. All right, let's go over some terms here really quickly. So as you guys are already know and are already aware, okay, adeno is the root and combining valve for gland. Adreno or adrenalo, okay, is the root and combining valve for adrenal glands. Cortico means cortex. Endocrino is the root and combining valve for endocrine. Okay, parathyro refers to parathyroid glands, and then thyro refers to thyroid glands. Okay, so acro, okay, this is a really important combining form. You're going to see this as relating to essentially extremities or height. You will often see individuals that have thyroid disorders. They can often present with something called acromegaly, which is generally defined as a large stature and or sometimes an enlarged jawline. So acromegaly can be a defining symptom and or characteristic of um, many endocrine disorders. Pardon me. Okay, we have calcio. Okay, that is the root combining valve for calcium. Dipso, which means thirst. Okay, there are times where polydipsia, which is a symptom of increased or frequent thirst, is very often a sign of hyperglycemia in some cases, right? Then we have uh, Kali or Kalo, which means potassium, and then Natro, which means sodium, right? And then we have obviously uh, Drome, which is a suffix meaning symptoms, right? You'll often hear a term known as prodromal, which essentially means symptoms that have been ongoing for some time, right? Prodromal, which essentially means just ongoing or lasting for quite a bit of time. Okay, obviously some other things for you to know, and I'll get a Quizlet done for you guys as well. I don't know that there is one for this material. So we have acidosis, obviously acromegaly, which is again enlargement of the extremities or jaw. Okay, Addison's disease and cretinism, Cushing syndrome. These are all different endocrine disorders. Okay, we know diabetes. We've talked about diabetes at length. Okay, goiter. So if any of you have ever seen goiter, this is actually a growth on the thyroid, and you'll often see this in patients. They'll have a rather large growth or mass on the thyroid. And very often thyroidectomy, which is removal of the thyroid, right? Often, or partial thyroidectomy is typically done to correct goiter in some cases. Okay. All right, guys, super short lecture for today. Thank you so much for bearing with me. Sorry that I was not able to be there in person with you today, but I will get this posted. Please give this a watch and just review this before taking quiz 4. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.